David Hume said, metaphysically, you cannot really make any statement on ultimate reality. He said, if a statement is not mathematical or not experimental, toss it into the flames. It is nothing but sophistry. Well, the problem with that test for authenticity is that that statement itself failed his own test, which means it really is a meaningless statement.
Jesus affirmed the Old Testament, including stories like Jonah and the whale, a story that is often difficult to comprehend. How can we view that story? And is Jesus' acceptance of it a strike against his credibility? Hear the answer to those questions today on Just Thinking with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Welcome to another Friday Q&A on Just Thinking. Today we're listening to the fourth installment of Ravi's time at the University of Michigan a few years ago. If you missed any of the previous segments from that event, we'll tell you how you can purchase a complete copy at the end of this broadcast. His final question deals with some of the seemingly far-fetched tales of the Bible. You know, it's one thing to believe in the teachings of Jesus, but understandably, many have a difficult time with stories like Jonah. As Christians, it's important to provide answers to those with serious questions. Let's hear how Ravi answers it in his time with students in Ann Arbor.
You so eloquently spoke tonight about the credibility of Jesus Christ, and this question may be a little bit repetitive considering some of the topics on Scripture, but my question would be to you is in presenting these points about Jesus Christ and his credibility that I see is if someone says, look at Jesus' life in the context of Scripture and how in there he affirms parts of the Old Testament, all of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and specifically referencing the story where he mentions Jonah and the being swallowed by the whale. My question is, in this, how do you deal with Jesus affirming as truth, as historically accurate, these stories of the Old Testament that have become such casualties, I guess, today because of our approach to Scripture and saying that this seems to be an incredible thing, that a man was swallowed by a whale, you know, outside of the fact that God created and allowed this situation. It just seems, it seems to me to be a very hard thing to swallow.
I understand.
No pun intended.
You don't mean it's fishy. No, okay. You know, I appreciate it. To say that any honest thinking Christian doesn't think about that would be dishonest. And that's only one among many stories. So let me begin with a worldview issue here. You see, there are two issues that are involved here. You're dealing with metaphysical issues, you're dealing with supernatural issues. David Hume attacked both of them. David Hume said, metaphysically, you cannot really make any statement on ultimate reality. He said, if a statement is not mathematical or not experimental, toss it into the flames. It is nothing but sophistry. Well, the problem with that test for authenticity is that that statement itself failed his own test, which means it really is a meaningless statement. So to say if a statement has to be meaningful, it has to be mathematical or experimental, is a self-defeating statement. Number two, when we think of the realm of the miraculous, we have to be very careful in trying to understand how God has operated in history and how he operates now in history. For example, if you go to Armenia today, they have celebrated for centuries the coming of Jonah to preach to them. In fact, I was invited, I don't know, the gentleman may be here because he lives in Detroit, I believe. I was invited by the church there 10 years before, in 1991. I was invited in 2001. I think it was going to be the 1800th year of the commemoration of the church in Armenia, and they were celebrating the arrival of Jonah to preach. Now, when you go back across history and you see things like that, you begin to say there are some historical notations that are remarkable that come back again and again to remind us that these things indeed go back closer and closer to the actual event. The materialist and the naturalist, though, has to take a step back and be absolutely honest with themselves. This world itself is a miracle. Your human body is a miracle. When you think of my professor of quantum theory at Cambridge was John Polkinghorne. And I remember John Polkinghorne giving us a lecture one day and talking about the contraction forces between expansion and contraction. And he looked at the small group of doctoral students. He said, I want you guys to know something. And he's a latecomer to Jesus Christ. He's written the book Now One World. And John Polkinghorne, his book Quantum is hailed by Physics Bulletin as one of the best in his genre. And Polkinghorne said, when you look at just that exactitude, so precise, and the margin of error, he said, is so small, that it would be the equivalent of taking aim at a 1 square inch object 20 billion light years away and hitting it bullseye. And then he looked in typical English understatement, looked out of the window and said, gentlemen, there's no free lunch. Somebody has got to pay. So as C.S. Lewis says, a slow miracle is as incredible as a fast miracle is. So what I say to you is, if the problem for the person is in the book of Jonah, it is understandable. But the problem is not then the book of Jonah. The problem is in the possibility of the miracle itself. And if you can see the supernatural all around you, just look at one thing, the marvel of sexuality. Think about it. The glory of sexuality. Not only its physical expression, its emotional expression, its pleasurable fulfillment, its knitting of the spirits of two people, the bringing birth of a life, the looking at the marvel of a little baby that is formed in somebody here told me he and his wife had a child that was only weighing 1 pound 10 ounces and survived. My wife used to be a nurse. She held a baby in her hand that was fit in her whole palm. That's in itself a miracle. The God who created this world and created you and me to keep somebody alive in the inside of a whale for that period of time is not exactly impossible for that kind of God. And I say to you, when you look at this ossuary now of James, the brother of Jesus, and that has been discovered, James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus, stunned archaeologists. They once upon a time told us there's no evidence for David. Now they found that evidence. They told us Pilate is not named anywhere. Now they found markings of Pilate and Saul going into the museum. Now they found James, the brother of Jesus. What would have happened if they'd found the ossuary of Jesus? Quite a startling thing, wouldn't it be? And yet, for 2,000 years they have tried to find. He talked about the bodily resurrection and he rose again from the dead. If you go to Larnaca today, there's a church in Cyprus where Lazarus became bishop. They excavated his grave in the 900s, and outside the grave it says, Lazarus, bishop of Larnaca, 4 days dead, friend of Jesus. Jonah is small stuff for one who conquered the grave. Let me take 2 minutes and end. People often ask me, and thank you so much, sir, and I'll be glad to wait, but that's a great question. Life's purpose, what is it? I wish so much I were where you are as a university student because I squandered those years. I wasted the best years of my university life and I regret it. You've got young, brilliant minds. You're in a great university. You have the privilege of getting the best intellectual stuff you can get. I want you to know, go for it. Do the best you can. Grow intellectually. Grow emotionally. Become a whole man or a whole woman. Complete. And if you can find the wonder of knowing God, you will find out what a marvelous thing it is to live for Him and live in His name. The definition of worship I give to you from Archbishop William Temple, that worship is the submission of all of our nature to God. It's the quickening of conscience by His holiness, nourishment of mind by His truth, purifying of imagination by His beauty, opening of the heart to His love, and submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration is the greatest expression of which we are capable. Your greatest expression is not to be a great physicist or a great chemist or a great engineer or a great teacher. Those are all secondary to find the greatest expression of worshiping God in spirit and in truth. The book I'm about to finish is called Recapturing the Wonder. When you know God through Jesus Christ and worship Him in spirit and in truth, you will recapture the wonder, and you'll be a great physicist, better one, because you know who is the author of all physics. And by the way, it is not uncommon in Cambridge today to see Stephen Hawking in an evangelical church. Every now and then, when he was asked why, he said, maybe I'm on a spiritual pilgrimage. What else can I say now? And I just say to you, with the best of minds and the best of heart, it'll all only take second place when you know who's fashioned you and made you for Himself. Learn to worship Him. That will give you meaning in life, and everything spokes out of that. I've said enough, and I'm hungry. God bless you. Thank you.